Good afternoon. I'm meteorologist Nathan Scott, and you are in store for another episode of Weatherwise. Last week, we talked about tropical storms and hurricanes, primarily where they developed across the globe, and also what was the difference between a Category 1 hurricane versus a Category 5. This week, we'll discuss hurricane forecasting and how it all comes together. You've seen this map show up a lot of times on our page. This is directly from the National Hurricane Center. It's that cone of uncertainty, and that gets a lot of people confused on exactly what this graphic means. We're going to dive into that in just 1 second because there's a lot of details that I'm going to explain to you over the next really 10 to 15 minutes. But before we get to this graphic, let's talk about how this graphic comes together by the National Hurricane Center. So as this cone is developed, yes, it looks like they just kind of drew this all over the place, but it actually takes into account of several circles. And these circles include a 12-hour period, a 24-hour period, a 36-hour period, and you can break this into separate circles over those time periods. And if you made about 7 or 8 circles and then connected them all together, you would get this forecast cone. This episode was recorded August 18th. Keep that in mind because I'm going to show you some current data from that date on what's happening out in the Atlantic at this time, which does feature a major hurricane by the name of Aaron. But when we take a look at the forecast cone, this is the goal from the National Hurricane Center. And it says right here, based on forecast over the past 5 years, the entire track of the tropical cyclone can be expected to remain within the cone roughly 60 to 70% of the time. That means as long as the center of the tropical storm or hurricane is located within this cone, they verify the forecast. It does sometimes go outside that cone. I'm going to give you 2 examples of how the forecast track was excellent when it came to Hurricane Helene, and then a little bit of a hit or miss combination way back when Hurricane Irma struck parts of the Caribbean and then also into Florida. But let's go over to the current situation again. This is recorded on August 18th. Here's the cone. The white area, that is the forecast period over the next day to 3 days. And then the more speckled area, that's the forecast period of day 4 and day 5. These icons that you see here that have an M, that means it's expected to be a major hurricane, which it is right now, because when we take a look at the current information here below, we see maximum sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. That is a major hurricane. This was issued at 2 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. Advisory number 29A. The movement is west-northwest at 10 miles per hour. So this latest forecast has the current wind field of hurricane strength right there in that darker brown color, and then this lighter brown color is tropical storm strength. The center of this system is expected to stay well offshore, away from the eastern seaboard. However, even with a storm this big, and it will continue to expand in its wind field and expand in its impacts, will produce some beach erosion and also rip currents from Florida all the way up through Maine, it looks like. And it'll be a close call in terms of maybe the tropical wind field reaching, say, the Outer Banks, because the Outer Banks right there, where my cursor is, extends pretty far away from the rest of the North Carolina coastline. You see the times here, the timestamp, 8 o'clock Tuesday morning. It's expected to be pretty much due east of the central Bahamas, and then by 8 p.m. Tuesday, it continues to move more to a northerly direction and expect to hang on to that north turn Wednesday evening, and then make a turn more to the northeast, taking it away from the East Coast. How can they expect this? Hurricanes are pretty much like a bottle in a stream, a bottle cap in a stream. Wherever that current steers, even though it can be a weak current, will allow that bottle cap to go in a different direction. And we have different features with the surface and also the upper parts of the atmosphere that are steering the system. For the most part, it's making this jog down to the south right now, but then eventually turn off to the north and northeast as it has started to, where you see that movement more towards the west-northwest. It will get more to a northerly direction because there's a trough that's going to be happening here into the northern tier of the country, and that's going to pick up that system and then send it on its merry way away from the United States. This is just one graphic from the National Hurricane Center. They break down everything that you really need to know and everything that a meteorologist can look forward to in terms of what are they expecting with this system over the next 1 to 5 days, even beyond that. So I'm going to go over every individual graphic, and you can access this. All you have to do is go to the National Hurricane Center, put it in your Google search engine, and it will take you to this page. And when you get to the page, it's going to look like this. So this is the 7-day graphical tropical outlook. You see there's Hurricane Aaron. You hover your cursor over it, and it says pretty much the same information that I just told you. Then this area, we have another system we're watching. Looks like it's going to be more favorable to become a tropical storm, potentially maybe the next hurricane if everything comes together perfectly. But it's located way out here into the eastern Atlantic. But as it makes its way towards the Caribbean, towards the Lesser Antilles, and then eventually the Greater Antilles, there's going to be the favorable environment for this storm system to potentially become a tropical depression, then a tropical storm. And that's this whole area. But when I hold my cursor over it, you see it's got a little paragraph saying tropical wave located over the eastern tropical Atlantic is producing limited disorganized showers and thunderstorms. So it doesn't have its act together right now, but it's expected to increase in the odds that it may try to get its act together with the formation of a tropical system, which is going to be a tropical depression for the most part. 60% chance of it happening over the next 7 days. But let's just focus on Aaron, and we're going to take a look at the wind speed probabilities. So this is another map, and this shows the probability of tropical storm force wind speeds for the next 120 hours. That's why you have that huge swath. So of course, it's primarily going to stay out in the Atlantic, but look at the tropical wind speed probability reaching the Carolina coast. It's a small probability, it's a low probability, but it is there, about a 5 to 10%, and then you get pretty close to maybe 20% right on the outer banks with this system. Every update that comes out from the National Hurricane Center, all these graphics will also adjust and update. So there you see 120 hours from 8 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time until August 18th to 8 a.m. Saturday, August 23rd. So that's where they're expecting the wind field to primarily stay out into the ocean, although Bermuda has a slightly better chance of seeing some stronger winds versus large parts of the United States. When can you expect the winds? Let's say you got some friends or family. They're thinking, hey, I'm going to the Carolinas. When can I expect this potential of tropical storm force winds, which would be 39 miles per hour or greater? There's the timeline for you. So it makes it very easy to get prepared in case you do have a storm head your direction. This is a great resource to check out. Wednesday, 8 a.m., it looks like that tropical storm wind field will start to approach the North Carolina, South Carolina border, and then it continues to exit off to the north and northeast with the trajectory of that system. Wind history. So when we take a look at the wind history, the orange area, that's where the tropical storm wind field is located. And then once it develops into a hurricane, you see the red start to pop up on the screen, and it continues to expand. And that's because this storm, and it's no surprise, as they get higher and higher up northern latitudes and start to ride their way along the East Coast, they expand typically. The storms get bigger. They go through eye wall replacement cycles, and the wind field continues to grow and grow and grow. And then therefore the impacts can reach out much farther than what is happening around the core of the system. The impacts can extend for hundreds of miles. And like I said, there's going to be some pretty big waves smacking into the eastern seaboard. We have the warnings cone interactive map. So if you want a little more interactive option, you can just go ahead and choose this graphic, and it shows you there's the wind field, and it breaks it down: 39 mile per hour winds, 58 mile per hour winds, 74 mile per hour winds. So at this time, we do have tropical storm force winds affecting parts of, looks like Turks and Caicos and the southern areas of the Bahamas. When we break down the first graphic, there's that cone, and it does show we do have tropical storm warnings in effect for the southern Bahamas, for Turks and Caicos, and then we have tropical storm watches, which means tropical storm conditions are possible but not a guarantee for more of the central Bahamas. That's just to the south of, say, Freeport and those locations, and Nassau. But once again, this trajectory primarily keeps the system off the coast. It looks like it could clip the Bahamas with some strong winds. And when I say strong winds, that is going to be tropical storm force winds. The warnings with the wind field cone, there you go. You've got hurricane force winds, once again, just to the northeast of the southern Bahamas and also the Turks and Caicos. But then that tropical storm force wind, 39 miles per hour greater, does inch its way into parts of the Bahamas and also the Turks and Caicos. So that is a quick overview of some of the stuff here with the National Hurricane Center. And there's still some more stuff. So we'll take a break. Next, we'll talk about a storm surge forecasting from the National Hurricane Center, the rip currents, and of course, the rainfall. So stay tuned. We've got more weather-wise coming up after this break. We know tropical systems don't only deliver strong winds, they also bring in what's known as storm surge. That's the combination of those very powerful winds pretty much starting to develop the little bubble of water that happens just before the eye wall reaches the coast, and you get a surge of water that can be 10 to 25 feet. And the National Hurricane Center does have some information on that as well. So this is a model that they use, but right now this is focused with Hurricane Aaron, and overall the storm surge looks pretty weak until you start to zoom in to more of extreme eastern parts of North Carolina. When we take a look at the legend here, that means storm surge potential. Nothing crazy, but there could be some flooded roadways that are pretty low to the ground, very close to sea level, greater than 1 foot above ground. There could be some flooding, but we've seen instances where we've got storm surge flooding greater than 9 feet, and sometimes it's even higher than that. So this is another great tool that meteorologists use, and this is taken into our weather graphics as well to figure out where there's going to be the greatest storm surge flooding. And there's a lot to think about with storm surge, because it's not only, yes, the wind speed of the hurricane present, but also past, because if you have a Category 5 hurricane that created that upwelling effect with the water, that little bubble of water, as the hurricane begins to weaken, maybe as a Category 3, it still could produce devastating storm surge, even though the winds have died down considerably from, say, 160 miles per hour down to maybe 135 miles per hour. With the waves being wicked, we also have, of course, the waves making their way along the East Coast, and then you have that whole thing with the sandbars, and a current starts to develop between the sandbar locations. So this is the rip current risk, and you never want to let your guard down on rip currents, even though this is the newest information on the system. Aaron is still out into the Bahamas. That's hundreds of miles away from the East Coast, but rip currents are certainly becoming an issue. And when you have a storm that was a Category 5, that churns up a lot of the water hundreds of miles away, sends big waves going towards the coastline, this can develop some serious rip current risk. And there is a high risk of rip currents from Florida. It drops down to a moderate risk, but still significant. The Carolinas, and it goes back up to a rip current risk going into the Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey beaches, all the way up to New England for the most part. You have that rip current risk. And it just varies on how the continental shelf is, what the orientation of the land is according to the wave action. There's a lot that goes into this map to produce the rip current risk. And when you have a high rip current risk, that's life-threatening. You don't want to be out in the water if you are not a good swimmer. But even if you are a good swimmer, if you see those red flags out there, don't take any chances. Just be smart. If you have friends or family like, oh, the hurricane's several hundreds of miles away, yeah, it's a little choppy, but it's no big deal. Rip currents are a hidden risk, and people have certainly lost their lives over the past several years as rip currents continue to be an issue that we are really starting to see develop. So there you see some examples. If you want to go to the beach, you want to actually choose where the waves are. You don't want to go where, oh, this looks much calmer, there's not many waves there. That's where the rip current is located, and that's when you could be maybe knee-deep high in the water and starts to pull you out. And you don't want to swim against it. You never want to swim against a rip current because it's too powerful that you will wear yourself out, and that's how people get into trouble and drown. You always want to swim parallel to shore. So there's the graphic that you see here. Swim parallel to shore because it's a narrow current. It's powerful, but it is narrow. Once you get out of that current, the waves will bring you back to the beach. So the main thing is you have to stay calm, swim parallel to shore, and that will get you out of trouble. But over the past 10 years, there's the fact about 10 to 15% of U.S. fatalities from tropical storms and hurricanes were caused by rip currents, even though they may have not necessarily seen direct impacts from the hurricane or tropical storm. Rip current deaths can stretch hundreds of miles away from where the actual rain and wind was located. So you just want to be smart about that. Final thing with this is the rainfall potential, because as we all know, tropical systems, they just bring in a lot of tropical moisture and then just wring out like a sponge for the most part, because you've got all this warm ocean water that's evaporating and all this heat is being developed by this storm system. You can produce copious amounts of rain in a short amount of time. So this is the latest with Hurricane Erin, and looking at the next 1 to 2 day rainfall, it doesn't look too significant across the United States because most of this system is going to stay out to sea. But if this were to make its way inland, it's going to bring in a lot of that rain. We saw that last year with Hurricane Helene that impacted greatly the Carolinas with several inches of rain, not only because of tropical moisture, but also because of what happens with the orographic lifting of the mountains. That tropical moisture hit the mountains, and then once that made its way up the mountain, it cooled, condensed, and you got areas that saw easily 15 to 20 inches of rain, producing catastrophic flooding over that part of the country last year. Next, we were talking about some tools and some forecast models that we look at on a day-to-day basis. I want to give you an example on those, once again with hurricane forecasting coming up. Before we close out weather-wise for this episode, we'll talk about one last thing on how forecasting comes together with intensity and also track by looking at ensembles. If you remember, when we talked about ensembles a long time ago in other weather-wise episodes, an ensemble is a model, but things are changed within that model to produce different solutions. We're looking at the intensity forecast with Hurricane Erin. Now this one shows different model solutions and not necessarily an ensemble. But when you look at this, you see the chart easily shows Category 4 status, and then your forecast period 12 until about 132 hours shows the system basically maintaining its strength for a little bit, and then it's going to encounter some cooler water into parts of the Atlantic. So that is going to weaken it somewhat. It may encounter a little more shear as well. So that's going to expect to take it down from a Cat 4 down to a Category 3, and then maybe eventually weaken going into a Category 2 and a Category 1 once we get into, say, the 5-day period. But this can change. I'm sure if we looked back last week at this time, this was not saying it was going to be a Category 5, which did happen this past weekend. It maintained a Category 5 strength for about a day or so, and then a weekend below a Category 5 strength. So that's the forecast. That's just one little bit of information that we're looking at as meteorologists, and I'm sure the National Hurricane Center is also watching that graphic as well. Another graphic is the track guidance, and this is looking at different models. Once again, not necessarily ensembles, but we do have ensembles that pretty much show the same information. You see all the different labels here, and you see the majority with Hurricane Aaron on this date continues to steer away from the United States. Yes, you do have one lone outlier that tries to take its way into South Carolina, and that's something that will need to be watched as the trends continue, but by far the confidence with Hurricane Aaron looks like it will stay primarily out to sea as long as this trend holds. We'll look at the trends by each of these model solutions over the next several days, and we'll see, is there more of a westward shift? Is there more of an eastward shift? And that will tell the story, and then also start to get a better idea on exactly where this system will go. But majority of people, meteorologists and information shows that Aaron most likely will not have any direct impacts on the United States unless this changes drastically. We will have indirect impacts, once again in the form of big waves slamming into the coastline, producing beach erosion. The rip currents and also the outer banks will get clipped by some tropical storm force winds. There is so much more to discuss about tropical forecasting, because we haven't even talked about what the forecast models were trying to show, and also just to show you how forecast models take a storm system and you can see it move in one direction or the other direction. But we will have more tropical weather information coming up in the next episode of WeatherWise. I mentioned we do have that system way out into the Atlantic. We'll take a look at that one and see what the information we'll be producing with that one in the next episode of WeatherWise. And if you have any ideas on what you want me to talk about here on WeatherWise, please share them with me. All you have to do is go to my Facebook page and direct message me, or you can also reach out to me by email at nscott@thv11.com. Until next time, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.